it's really interesting, hearing Keith kind of talk about, how they got in the sampling business and how it evolved, and it's all about technology. They used a machine that was originally designed for one purpose, and they kind of tweaked it, and all of a sudden something new was born. And so when I kind of look at how not just hip hop but entertainment has evolved, it's all been, it's not, you get the parallel shifts based on technology. And so what we see, from those that invest in the businesses are, sort of how aligned are the creatives with sort of being able to use the technology. And when I think about hip hop, it is born of African American culture. It has been African Americans' way of telling a story. And I was in a meeting with some studio people in Los Angeles a couple months ago, and we were just talking about the resurgence of sort of black content, if you will. And someone at the table joked, "Wow, black is the new black." Then another person said, "No, black is the new green." And then another person said, "No, multiculturalism is the new green." And what was so interesting about this conversation is I was the only person of color in the conversation. So everyone is beginning to recognize sort of how there is a real, to your point, to Pamela's point, a new economy around that was born of hip-hop music. I was in Nashville a couple of weeks ago meeting with a faith-based media company. And they were talking about some of the faith-based initiatives that they're working on. Again, it is a majority company. And the CEO looked at me and he said, "You know what? This whole rise that we're seeing in faith-based programming, whether it's the movie The War Room or some of the various other things that have come out," he said, what the world doesn't understand is that African American films, black films, go back to the 60s and 70s, 80s. They've been doing faith-based longer than anyone. And so again, it is a brand new economy that has been created out of a culture that is now more accepted than it's been before. And I think the challenge for those of you in the room that are on the creative side, if you want to, if your objective is to kind of get to that investment community, you need to make sure that your creativity is tied into technology and using technology to monetize your creative process.
And the way that hip hop did.
The way that hip hop did.
But early days of hip hop, everyone didn't love it. And then a lot of people, I mean, certainly from let's say from a Madison Avenue and a Wall Street perspective, it was like, oh, it's a fringe.
Not until Adidas.
Not until, tell us the Adidas story, Faith.
Tell us, Faith.
Tell us, Keith. No, Adidas was the first major brand to sponsor. I know, me too. I wore a spot bill. Was the first major brand to sponsor a hip hop act with Run DMC, and it changed everything. And seeing their show at Madison Square Garden and watching people like take their Adidas off and wave it in the air and be like, yes, that broke through.
That was the tipping point.
Yes,
I think that was a tipping point with Madison Avenue.
Yes.
Which ultimately leads to a tipping point with Wall Street and Main Street.
Yeah. So now I'd like to pull Tuma and Daniel into the conversation because they're the programmers and the curators of new art forms. And I think that people, sometimes people like a Bem or Charles will look to the Tumas and the Daniels and say, what's really out there that's moving the market and making people feel some kind of way, and what does that mean? So maybe both of you guys could jump into the conversation as programmers or content curators and talk about hip hop and how you've seen it grow.
Oh, well, you want me to go first? Well, the thing about hip hop is hip hop stays hungry, and it's never ends. It's like a bottomless pit of hunger. There's always somebody or a market or a movement on the cusp, and that somebody or market or movement is always looking for some kind of validation, right? And it's always an underdog, and that's what keeps hip hop alive. And so as a programmer, I'm constantly monitoring, like, who's this disruptor? You know what I mean? Who's this? So if it's a person, let's say the time when 50 was hot in the streets and mixtapes became the way to break into, you know what I mean, the urban mainstream, then thus the mainstream, or I don't know, when Migos is, Complex had an article about Migos being super influential because of the way, like the cadence, the way, you know what I mean? And how everybody was copying, yeah, exactly. Or even nobody wants to give T-Pain credit from a few years ago, but with the auto-tune and everything, you know what I mean? Whether you liked it or not, either the as like a drumstick, like percussion, or, you know what I mean? Or somebody using the, you know, whatever, you get it. Just the same way back in the day, DJs were using the records rather than actual analog instruments, you know what I mean? Like in the quote-unquote real musicians were looking at them like, that's not music. What do you do? You don't even know how to play this one. You can't read music. What the fuck? Like, you know? You know what I mean? But it's the same thing that's constantly, and when you do a root cause analysis, it's hunger. It's hunger. And it's whoever's the hungriest, and whoever's the hungriest will collaborate with whoever's the hottest. Whoever's the hungriest will, you know what I mean, will show up to stuff and do what they have to do, behave themselves, etc., etc. And then the ones who keep their hunger, you know what I mean? Drake was a disruptor several years ago, best I ever had, with that mixtape, So Far Gone. You know what I mean? If anyone who remembers that time and the excitement around it and how it bubbled from the internet, and Hot 97 was playing best I ever, in New York, at least I was in New York, was playing it so much, but somehow he's like maintained it, you know? And part of that is because there's that chip on the shoulder. And hip hop as a culture, hip hop as a genre, the reason it's still around today, it's so relevant, is because there's this unending supply of people, markets, or movements that have that underdog thing. Yeah, so that's it.
Monetizing, because I work for a not-for-profit. I work at a... Talk into it more? Okay, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that. So it's funny for me to talk about monetizing because I work for a not-for-profit contemporary art museum. And my job, you know, but we still invest. And my job is to invest in the community that's around us. The museum that I work for is 42 years old. And it's been in Atlanta this whole time. It was in Virginia Highlands and Old Fourth Ward, then moved to the West Side. And it's one thing that I learned when I moved to Atlanta 9 months ago and started working at this museum, is that it has this national, international reputation. It's known within the art world, but we don't all live in the art world. We live in the world. And my job is to go out. I'm just about every weekend, if I'm not around Atlanta, going to see all sorts of, you know, art shows, music festivals, whatever. I'm out all the time if I'm here in Atlanta. If I'm not here in Atlanta, I'm in New York, or this weekend I'll be in Chicago doing studio visits and going to a couple different new musicians showcases in Chicago. And I'm just always out looking with the idea of bringing it back to Atlanta and making it relevant for my neighborhood in Atlanta, on the west side of Atlanta. And I think that was, you know, for too long, I feel like the museum that I work for had these really wonderful exhibitions, really great exhibitions that got great press, but it was sort of isolationist. It was for a small group of folks that were, pretty much living OTP and driving in for the exhibition openings. And my job is to sort of open the doors and have the museum be essentially a community plaza or a place, or like a community square where people can come with ideas. They can pitch things to us. We don't have to, the way that I think of it is people don't have to wait for the museum to come to them. They can come to us with ideas. And we can, sometimes we can accommodate, sometimes we can't. But it's our responsibility to be part of the neighborhood that we're in.
I wanted to pick up on a point, 2 points. Tuma, you talked about Drake and that kind of being something you could see where the market was going. And I think that that's interesting because Drake is Canadian, and he's a part of a kind of a Canadian hip-hop golden age of sorts. Do you guys think that's fair?
No,
to
completely.
say? And I think that, 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, no one saw that coming. Or, like Canadian rap, how can that be cool? Like rappers from London, how can that be cool? It can, obviously it can be.
They was taught by the American rappers.
Wait, but can I say something? We just had, so last Saturday I was with Cardinal Fischel on Saturday night. So he was in New York. So Cardinal, back in the day, he had an EP called Hustlin'. This is 1999. That's the first time anyone ever thanked me on an album. So sentimental value, you know what I mean? Like seeing your name on that album, you're like, whew, right? So what happens is this, so we catch up on Saturday nights in New York, and I was talking to him. I was saying, oh, you know what? When Cardinal came to, the first time came to the 2000, right? They got a deal with MCA. Cardinal Fischel got a deal. He was Canadian. He was the hottest thing in Canada, and everyone was like, yeah, Canada, like, and then I'm from a music video channel, so at that time, so it was like, yeah, much music, nobody gives a fuck about that. You know what I mean? Like, no one, but Cardinal was dope, right? And what happened was, there was a wave of Canadian rappers who got signed by American thing. It was Socrates was signed to Def Jam, Shocklee was signed to Priority, Jellystone was signed to Warner Brothers.
Yes, no.
We don't count that. I'm talking about the Chaos, Astroworks. It was just like this thing that happened, and none of it worked. None of it connected. Cardinal later on had a hit when he signed to Akon years later, right? None of it worked. It was like this Canadian movement. The magazines were predicting like this invasion, the border, et cetera, Now, when Drake and The Weeknd and right now Tory Lanez is bubbling, and nobody's calling Tory Lanez Canadian hip hop. All that stuff was labeled Canadian hip hop. What that generation did was they primed for this generation. They set it up just the same way every generation in other parts of hip hop set up for the next, and now they don't always get credit. Especially hip hop, we have short memories, and we don't want to give credit because we don't want to share some of the money. Maybe, you know what I mean? We want to be attached to the next thing, et cetera, et cetera. And literally, I was just telling it was a whole bunch of musicians from Africa who really want global recognition. I was like, look, if that could have happened, how many years ago, where that was Canadian hip hop, and no one's even calling this, like, no one's even saying, this week is the first week. Number 1, 2, 3, 4 Billboard is from Canadian artists. First time ever. It's Drake. It's a Weekend Hills is number 1. Number 2 is What You Mean, Justin Bieber. Number 3 is Hotline Bling, Drake. Number 4 is Can't Feel My Face. First time ever, all 4 Billboard spots. Only the media is noticing. Everyone else is just music, et cetera, et cetera. Same shit used to happen in Atlanta. Remember? You know what I mean? Like, you couldn't even imagine. So, in my opinion, Bone Crusher, I Never Scared, when they mixed it with Sizzla, was the first time in New York you heard a real Atlanta. No, when I say real Atlanta, I'm talking about non-outcast. Because, I mean, a sound with the local, you know what I mean? A very incredibly local flavor, like, you know what I mean? And, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, two things. I want to get Keith's perspective on, how it feels as being one of these originators and seeing how it has evolved over the years. But I also want to bring Bem into the conversation because I think that the idea of a creative economy with diverse perspectives at the table for the city of Atlanta is very dear to your heart. And I also think that there are no shortcuts. As Tuma was saying, that things take time. So it's got to involve policy. It's got to involve, that's weird. It's got to involve policy.
Hot mic.
I got a hot mic. It's got to involve, I really did, don't I? It's got to involve business entities. And it's got to, thank you so much. And it's got to involve markets, people consuming the goods and services from business. So, Bem, I know a lot has been discussed this morning, but I do want to bring you into the conversation from that perspective on how you see hip hop in Atlanta and hip hop as a tool for Atlanta, or some people call Atlanta port city for creativity. And so how we can use like this very rich pool of creativity and innovation that we have here and create even more commerce and more opportunity for distribution on Spotify and big deals with SunTrust and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame famers.
It's funny. I mean, talking about Drake, it was really a mix of Drake during the So Far Gone time, and the nail in the coffin for me was Steve Stout's Tanning of America, and I just combined those two worlds. But I, along with 3 other people, had the distinction of doing Drake's first general admission show in the States, like not attached to a college and people who watch Degrassi, not like anything, it's just like general admission. And it was just and we weren't attached to like Jermaine Dupri or like none of the big people that like they had nothing to do with with us doing this show. I went to Jackson State University with Lil Wayne's manager, and then my homegirl Fadia Cater, who was one of the 4, she knew DJ Lissa Monet in Toronto. And I went around like all the gatekeepers in Atlanta that you would go to like try to do shows or whatever. And we were able to go around the system via the internet, just, emailing, Facebook. And a friend of mine used to book shows, and people put this magic around trying to do a show. And he was like, yo, I sent him a message on MySpace, yo. And this was like around that time. Like, and people, especially if you got some money, people will respond like through MySpace. And it would be funny because they would go around the label management, so to speak. Again, kind of technology as a disruptor, like it's disrupting the gatekeepers and the chain of communication. And the fact that we were able to beat LA and New York to this Drake show, and we had like Shaka Zulu and Jermaine and Usher came, but we didn't invite them. The hype had just built, and the tickets sold out because we posted a flyer on the internet, and then people that were on blogs, they made the decision. No help from radio, and we went to radio at first because I'm 36, so I've still got like a little bit of the old guard in me. So I'm like, man, we probably need some help. And the radio turned me down because they were asking about Drake's BDS spins. And I'm like, yo, he's not on radio, he's just on the internet, and people love him. But they were stuck in the old way. But the fact that we were able to do that without any of the old guard, and then you move that to, I took 15 creatives to Stockholm in 2012. Again, Facebook, I met through a mutual friend of a person like me in Stockholm that cared a lot about culture. And she was from Stockholm. She was a visual artist and had come to SCAD in Atlanta right after she got out of her mom's house. She straight from Stockholm to Atlanta. And when you first get out your mom's house, wherever you go, that's gonna stick with you. So Atlanta stuck with her, and she always wanted to showcase like the culture and how museums and hip hop and all that seemed to connect from her perception of Atlanta. And so no cultural affairs. Again, I attempted to reach out to people in government, Georgia Department of International Visitors or whatever, but these old systems are very slow moving. And I was able to take 15 creatives to Stockholm via Kickstarter and just conversations back and forth with people in Stockholm that could make decisions. And I made it to the castle in Sweden. I never met the king, but his nephew, I got connected to his nephew. They took me on a tour of the castle, and the first thing he asked me, you listen to hip hop, you from Atlanta? And I'm like, yeah. And he was like, well, and he knew Rick Ross wasn't from Atlanta, and he said that. Like, I know Rick Ross is from like Miami, I think. But he asked me if Rick Ross was a correctional officer for real, and how, via the way hip hop was presented, how did that like work? And this is in Stockholm, and all of this is via the internet. And I've traveled, other places, and the culture is what carries the weight. It is not the world's busiest airport. That carries the weight. It's a physical structure and some of these other things, but you go out around the country and throughout the world, the first thing that people will bring up about Atlanta is the culture. And Atlanta's a pro-black, we are the black Mecca. Yeah. And so there's a responsibility in that. And that comes, once you see the money, and creative economy brought in $48 billion into Atlanta last year. That's everything. Creative economy is tech, it is the innovative careers, it is art installations, fashion design, modern design. That is all falls up under the creative economy. Now it was $48 billion compared to $225 billion in California and $187 billion in New York. And we just little old Georgia, but $48 billion. The creative economy says you deserve a seat at the table, not advocacy, because that's asking, but because you brought in that amount into the economy. If people are to make decisions on the school system, if they are to make decisions on what time clubs close, or marijuana, no marijuana, fireworks, no fireworks, do we use this amount of money to fix the roads, or how do we fix the roads? You'll see that these government structures, they don't take in Kickstarter. Like, what if you just raise money on Kickstarter to fix the road? Like, you never see a government approach it, and that because they're slow moving, but because I've had victories being disruptive, and I work at the Center for Civic Innovation, and we specialize in connecting those dots. The answers is using this disruptive mindset of the culture, and from government to people that work in medicine. What I learned from Steve Stout is you have a right to take the culture with you into these buildings and use the culture to innovate and disrupt whatever your discipline is. We are America's #1 non-taxable export because it's a vibe. And you have a right to use that vibe in government, in public planning, in urban planning, in education, because hip hop was one of the original disruptors. It is the disruption of the culture in which you can use to change laws or just think differently. And that's the basis of the creative economy.
The phrase that I thought it was very, very, very eloquently stated, but the phrase that keeps being used over and over is disruption. And, it's not just focused on music or entertainment. It's happening in the financial service industry. It's happening in the housing industry. It's happening in the restaurant industry. Disruption. Trying to find a way to do it differently, do it quicker, be more efficient with it. I look at the music industry, and, to be honest, I say this industry is probably 100 funerals and 300 retirements away from being a really vibrant industry. Because with those 400 people that need to go, I mean, it's true. I mean, Faith knows what I'm talking about. It's 100 funerals and 400 retirements, and then we're good. If you get those people out of the way, and you get them to start thinking, if you can get them to start thinking differently. I mean, my group, we cover both film and entertainment. Film and music and television. And I will tell you that the film and television guys look at, because all the challenges that the music industry is facing, ultimately, the film industry and television industry face, sort of distribution, piracy. And the film guys, they get it. They look at the music industry and they say, whatever decision they made, we're going to do the complete opposite. And it's because there are so many people, I think, in the upper echelons of music, and I don't want to offend any of my clients, but so many people in the upper echelons of music that continue to try to keep things the way they used to be. And what is causing them so much angst is this culture is all about disruption. And they can't figure that out. They can't get out of their own way.
So I want to open the floor up for questions. Gentleman in the front row.
If that disruptor, that game changer, that next wave that's coming was in this room, what would each of you have to say to that individual that would help them to know how to go about that?
I guess. I don't know. It's like know your business. Sometimes the longer you do this is not an overnight thing. Everybody thinks this is an overnight thing. Some people get it overnight, but some people have been doing it for 10, 12 years. So it's still about learning the craft, how well you know your business, and how well you know your creative side, what you can do and what you can't do. So I'm a person about the longer you learn, the longer you do this, the longer you learn, this is when you become good. You know, sometimes some people, like I said, I can't speak for people that make it overnight. I mean, literally overnight, you was on your couch yesterday, and all of a sudden you clicked up with a crew that got the lane, and you hot. And then all of a sudden you come out with your next joint, nobody hears from you. We got a lot of that. You know, we got a lot of cats that made joints one time, one hot record, and that's it. The thing is to stay in this business for as long as I've been in it. I've been in this like 30 years, and I still make a living at it. Can you do that? But that's what you want to do.
Oh, I was also going to say that to make sure that you're taking advantage of all the ways that you can get your music out there on your own, out of label, TuneCore, CD Baby. I'm blanking out on it.
Beatport, this is everywhere. There's a ton of them.
And not just SoundCloud, because when I talk about clutter, I mean SoundCloud, because it's a little bit overrun. And I think that, and you'd be surprised about, you know, how these services can actually get your music out there. It's.
Can I say one thing? Getting your music out there is one. Excuse me. Getting your music out there is one thing. Making money off your music is another.
Yeah.
That's where the clutter comes in.
Exactly.
Everybody got music out there. Everybody in here can make a record.
Yeah.
Can you make money off of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Can you get royalty paid off of it? Do you know how to get that?
Yeah, and that's the one thing that I would add is to answer your question. You know, the rules and the regulations and copyright laws are changing, you know, as we speak. There are so many things before courts, before Congress. So, you know, as you figure out how you're going to get paid, make sure you understand your rights. I mean, to me, that's probably the second thing you do after you create whatever it is you create. Understand your rights, because if you create it, you own it. And so there are laws that govern your ownership, as crazy as that is. So you need to understand what those laws and those rights are.
I think, you know.
Oh, you would.
Artists out of San Diego. We usually don't get too much shine coming to these A3C festivals, but I'm here representing. But anyway, I'm curious. To me, hip hop is my culture. I love it, and I think that it's precious, and I think it's something that should be preserved. But how do you feel about, because I don't want it to go like jazz and rock and roll, where, I think it's important, especially me being in San Diego, that I diversify, because it's important. And I love the diversity in hip hop. But how do you feel like, I'm listening now and you listen to lyrics and you've got all these other cultures, man, that they're lyrical now. You know, they're real lyrical. You got white people that are lyrical, Asians that are lyrical, Latinos that are real lyrical now. And now it seems like we're diminishing our lyrical skills. It's almost as if the lyrics are being dummied down. And so I'm afraid that these other artists from these other cultures are coming in doing it better than us. And, you know, I don't want us to be a passing fad. You know, I don't want us to fade out. It's important because think about it. A lot of us as African Americans, we faded out in jazz. We faded out in rock and roll, which are things that we kind of started, was in the forefront of that, the pioneers of that. And it's important for me to make sure that we do, like you guys were saying, keep the culture, because we have to preserve it. But what are we doing ourselves an injustice with dumbing down our lyrics like that? Where are we going with this?
Well, you're absolutely right. But I look at this as an art form. You're entitled to make your own art. But is portrayed and what's put out there, that's the problem. You know,
It's the
when you got a programmer at a radio station that wants that, you know, they won't pick up a Joey Badass. You see what I'm saying? But there are tons, you know, I work with tons of lyrical cats. You know, everybody's still out there, but who's going to get to the front? Who's going to get that media shine? Who's going to be lyrical that's going to get on BET? You know what I'm saying? So, I can go for days like this.
Yeah.
This is my world. I'm kidding. But that's the thing. It's just up to us as we get older. You know, I deal with some of the older cats. They got that. I ain't dealing with them young dudes. But if we all don't come together as one, this is what you get.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for attending. Thank our panelists.